Hey everyone, it's Lexie. So in today's video, I'll be sharing with you some of my spring reading recommendations. So these are books that I either feel have that dreary, wet, rainy feel to them, or they are books that I just associate with spring because I read them in springtime. So these were like ones like distinctly, some of these were like, oh my goodness, I remember when I was reading that, like distinctly remember when it was springtime and reading it. So I feel like that is it's always fun to really kind of remember where you were and like what was going on when you were reading a book. So yeah, without further ado, let's get started. So starting out, this is one that both has that like wet, dreary feel to it, but it's also one that I read in springtime as well, and it is Dark Witch by Nora Roberts, and this is the first book in the Cousins O'Dyer trilogy. And so basically the premise of the story is that it takes place in Ireland, and essentially it follows this family over the course of generations. So basically we flash forward to the 1600s, where there was this dark sorcerer that got defeated by this kind of light sorcerer, or kind of a good wizard essentially, and the good wizard died in the process, but he wasn't able to fully kill this bad sorcerer. So this bad sorcerer has been basically haunting the family and like the generations afterwards, and they've never been able to fully get rid of him until we have the current set of cousins, and they are finally, like, the stars have aligned for them to finally take down this sorcerer, and it kind of goes off from there. But I remember reading this trilogy. This was, I think, probably one of the first series that I like marathoned. I remember it was when basically the spring, like end of April, early May, when I was getting ready to graduate from my undergrad. So that is something like I distinctly remember reading during that time. And not only that, but it's also in Ireland, where it's kind of like wet and damp and soggy, but the grass is very green. But like that's what I think of, and I feel like this is a nice fun trilogy that you could also marathon as well, so that is always a plus. That's what I did when I read them. But yeah, like I said, like yeah, it gives me that spring feeling, and I can totally see myself reading this in the student center in the morning at the Starbucks. Like I have that distinct memory, and I think that like it's very near and dear to my heart. This is one that I read in springtime, but I feel like it is one that it packs a hard emotional punch, and it is A Fall of Marigolds by Susan Mesner, and I think this is actually my first Tales and Teacups book club pick from like years ago. But basically the premise of the story is that it follows two women who experienced a tragedy in their life. So the present day storyline, it follows a woman who it's the 10-year anniversary of 9/11, and she is still dealing with the aftermath of losing her husband in the World Trade Center. And then we also follow another woman during kind of, I want to say it is September 1911, and it follows this nurse on Ellis Island, and she is also suffering from a tragic incident. She viewed the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, and that very much has basically turned her life around, and both of these women are struggling with overcoming their grief and learning to just kind of live. And so what ties these two women together is a mysterious scarf that has marigolds on it, and it kind of goes off from there. But not only I think is this book really interesting, and there was a lot of quotes in here that deals with grief and overcoming it, and a lot of it is what I can relate to when I lost my grandmother, just that feeling. But I feel like this is just a good book to read, because if it's dark and dreary outside, you can read this, and you like, even though it deals with hard subject matter, like it makes you feel warm, and I think that's what makes this book so special. So going on with the soggy, misty feeling, I then have The Forgotten Garden by Kate Morton, and basically the premise of the story, so it follows this woman whose grandmother just passed away, and so she's going through her grandmother's stuff and stumbles upon this very strange, one-of-a-kind fairy tale book, and that kind of leads her into learning more about her grandmother's past. And so her grandmother was shipped on a boat from England to Australia, and no one knows who her family was. She was adopted, like no one knows her family. So while this woman is trying to piece together the mysteries of her grandmother's like life, like when she was a child. We kind of get a dual storyline back into the early 1900s following a young woman and just how their storylines intertwine. But this book was so good, and it's definitely one that I want to reread. I think once my life kind of settles down a little bit from school, I definitely want to pick it up because it is a little bit of a big book, but it doesn't read like a big book. But what I really like about this is that, like, picture England, like London, where it's just dark and rainy and misty and all that stuff. Like, that is totally like atmospheric how I see like spring. For like, I know like spring is like new flowers and like life and all that, but like where we live, it basically goes from like rain all the time to summer. Like spring doesn't really exist where we live. But this one is such a hard-hitting novel. Like, I was shocked reading this and I couldn't put it down because even though it was so big, like I remember I read this in the summer and I read it very, very quickly, probably in a day and a half. Like, that's how good this book was. So if you're looking for a historical book, like a book that has a historical aspect but also has like a mystery aspect in here as well, I recommend you check this book out. So even though I said where I live it may not be like, you know, new life flowers in springtime, I did manage to find a book that does have like a gardeny, like flowery feel, and it is Garden Spells by Sarah Addison Allen. And this basically follows a family of women who are witches, and they each have their own kind of magic capabilities, and they have a special garden that produces apples that can, you know, you can see your future, or they make little, like, they can help you sleep, or sleep potions, or like love potions and like that stuff. But the sisters of this family have a falling out years and years ago, and then the youngest sister finally comes back to her hometown and things kind of take off from there. But this book has such a fun magical realism aspect in here, and kind of just the peculiarness of these women is very similar to, if you've seen The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, just the dynamics of the witches in the house. Like, that's how I kind of see it as, and just the different personalities. I really enjoyed this. I read this a long time ago, but it was still a lot of fun to read, and it just gives you that like total, like, I feel like spring's a good time to read magical realism, and this one just has that kind of flowy, happy, you know, new life of feeling that spring has. And lastly, I feel like I've been talking about this book a lot recently, but I feel like because I forgot about it for so long, I need to make up for lost time, and it is Lilac Girls by Martha Hall Kelly. I know a few of you have read this now, so that I feel like I did my job. I was like, okay, I read this, I forgot about it, reread it, fell in love with it again. And I feel like this one I really need to kind of stress because it was so unique. It basically tells 3 women's point of views during the course of World War II. So we follow Caroline, who is a socialite in New York. We follow Kazia, who is a Polish woman who gets sent to a concentration camp called Ravensbrück. And then we also follow Herta, who is one of the doctors that did testing on the women prisoners in Ravensbrück. And it follows how all their stories intertwine. And I think this book, there's something about this author's writing that really draws you in, and you just get totally sucked into her writing. Like, we would read, and when I reread this with my aunt, we would read it in about 50-page increments. And I'm sorry, ooh, sorry, a little burp there, but basically we would reread this in 50-page increments, and I would be reading and I'd be like, shoot, I went over the page limit, because I would be so sucked in with her writing. Like, I was like, whoa man, completely like drew me in. I get totally absorbed in her writing, and I think that's something really special, and it doesn't happen all the time. So that is why I'm stressing this. And I feel like because it deals with lilacs and, you know, coming in bloom, I got the little spring part in there. So I think like that's why it would be a good spring read. But like I said, I'm making up for lost time because this book was amazing and I totally forgot about it. So that's it, guys. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what some of your spring reading recommendations are and all of that fun stuff. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, and I will see you guys next time. Bye guys.